Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insomniac Files, where reality and the dream world collide in a haze of mystery and suspense. Each night, we embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the subconscious, and tonight's tale is no exception. Prepare yourself for an adventure that will blur the line between sleep and waking, where nightmares manifest and secrets from the deepest recesses of your mind emerge. As we walk this path, know this: in the world of dreams, nothing is ever truly as it seems. It began with a scream, not loud, not panicked, but stretched, like fabric tearing through fog. St. Ferris Hospital, East Wing, 3:12 a.m. A nurse named Maeve had pressed the emergency call button, hand trembling as she stared into the eyes of a man who had no wristband, no chart, and no memory. "Who are you?" she had whispered. The man blinked slowly. He sat upright in the gurney bed, clothed in paper scrubs. His skin was cold. His pupils were normal. But his voice... "Have I been here before?" he asked. The question was not fear-driven, it was mechanical, rehearsed, like someone reading a line from a forgotten script. Detective Hauser arrived 15 minutes later, coat still damp from the rain outside. He entered room 412, where the man sat cross-legged, arms folded neatly in his lap. Still, silent, cooperative. No ID. No wounds. No hospital record. And yet, security footage showed him walking the halls hours earlier, in surgical gloves. "Do you recognize this place?" Hauser asked. The man tilted his head. "This place recognizes me," he said. Dr. Herlock Gnomes stood just behind, watching through thick-rimmed glasses that were half-fogged from the corridor's warmth. "His memory has been edited," Gnomes said softly. "But not erased." Hauser frowned. "Meaning?" "Something was removed, precisely, carefully, like a surgeon excising a tumor from the mind." The patient smiled at nothing in particular, and whispered, "I keep hearing my name, but it's always one syllable too short." Hauser's knuckles whitened on the notepad in his hand. Outside, the lights flickered once, then went out completely. When the backup generators kicked in, they did so without their usual hum. No buzz. No surge. Just a low pulse, like the hospital was breathing through artificial lungs. Hauser and Gnomes walked the halls slowly, flashlights sweeping over gurneys and wall-mounted heart monitors. The East Wing felt different now, not dark, but hollow. Like someone had lifted the place from its foundations and let it settle half an inch off reality. "I don't like this," Hauser muttered. "You shouldn't," Gnomes replied. "St. Ferris is running on residual memory, not electricity." They reached the security office. Hauser unlocked the panel, flipped through the feeds, and froze. All footage from the last 6 hours was gone. Not corrupted. Not blank. Erased. Only one video remained, timestamped 1:11 a.m. A silent hallway, empty, except for a single frame. A man, identical to the patient in room 412, walking toward the surgical wing with his head tilted down. He was carrying something. A clipboard, and a scalpel. Hauser replayed it. Then again. Each time, the man's posture shifted, subtly, as if the footage itself were remembering a different version. "Looping inconsistencies," Gnomes whispered. "Video systems don't do that unless they're feeding off altered metadata." "Meaning?" Gnomes turned slowly. "Someone didn't just erase memory from a man. They erased it from the building." Hauser's jaw tensed. "How?" The lights flickered again. Gnomes smiled faintly. "We've stepped into the recall phase." Hauser didn't ask what that meant, because from the far end of the hallway, someone began calling his name. But it wasn't a voice he recognized. It was his own. The voice was faint, yet undeniable, like a memory half-formed in a dream. Hauser turned sharply, torchlight swaying across the corridor. But the hallway was empty. Still, the voice persisted. "Hauser, you forgot something." It came again, from behind the walls this time, not from any speaker or room. Like it had traveled through the very structure of St. Ferris. Hauser's breath tightened in his throat. Gnomes, however, was unshaken. "Identity is built on repetition," he said calmly. "The voice we hear the most in our lives is our own." Hauser took a step back. "You think the hospital is echoing?" "Not echoing," Gnomes replied. "Projecting. Something, or someone, is imprinting memory patterns onto its internal systems. Possibly via the intercom network. Possibly something older." They reached the nurse's station, where Maeve, the one who'd found the patient, sat trembling. Her shift notes were gone, pages torn from her charting log. When Hauser asked her what she remembered, she hesitated for a long time. "I know his face," she said, eyes glassy. "I know that man. But I don't know when I met him. Or how I know." Gnomes crouched beside her, holding her wrist gently. "Your pulse is regular. No pupil dilation. No signs of forced sedation." Maeve whispered. "He said my sister's name. She's been dead 12 years. Gnomes nodded. "That confirms it." "Confirms what?" Hauser asked. "Whatever's editing memory isn't just targeting the subject," Gnomes said. "It's broadcasting, corrupting the surrounding data, emotional, sensory, and neurological." Maeve closed her eyes. "Then how do I know what's real?" Gnome stood quietly. "You don't," he said. "But your nervous system might." They descended a floor to the older surgical wing, West's block, where the lights were dimmer, older, and stained amber from years of water damage. Hauser walked in silence, flashlight held low. Every step echoed with the soft hiss of dust shifting under linoleum tiles. Room 206 appeared on the directory panel, but when they followed the map, it wasn't there. Between room 204 and room 208 was just a blank section of wall. Gnomes tapped it gently. "Sheetrock," he said. "Newer than the rest. Less wear. Paint doesn't match." Hauser checked the hospital's structural records on his phone. Room 206 had once been an isolation theater. Closed 5 years ago after a fire in the internal wiring system. But no report of fire damage. No insurance claim. No transfer of records. "That's not a fire closure," Hauser murmured. Gnomes nodded. "It's a memory closure." He removed a pen light and shone it at the skirting. A thin sliver of air pulsed through a micro gap in the plaster. "There's a room in there," Gnomes whispered. "And I think someone's still using it." Hauser leaned close, and for just a moment, he heard the sound again. That soft hum. High. Precise. Almost like a tuning fork held against bone. It matched the same tone the unknown patient had hummed earlier. Gnomes placed his hand on the wall and closed his eyes. "Reverberation pattern is too symmetrical," he said. "It's not sound, it's residual neurofeedback. Like when a brain repeats something over and over to keep it from disappearing." Hauser looked at the wall and realized someone in room 206 had been repeating a memory so hard it had started bleeding through the plaster. Hauser paced the length of the wall between rooms 204 and 208, running his fingers slowly along its surface. Though it looked solid, he could feel faint tremors, like a vibration, rhythmic and strangely familiar. Inside the wall, something lived. Not in the sense of heartbeats or breathing, but in the eerie consistency of the hum, as if a thought were being transmitted through concrete. Gnomes removed a compact bone conduction microphone from his inner coat pocket, the sort used by neurologists to monitor cranial tremors in real time. He pressed it against the plaster and smiled. "There's a vocal pattern beneath the hum," he said. "Barely audible, like a whisper on loop." Hauser leaned in. They played it back through the doctor's audio filter. The voice was low, aged, almost mournful. A woman's voice, repeating a single phrase in a fractured whisper. "Do you remember the river?" Hauser tensed. He knew that sentence. Or thought he did. The phrase tugged at something buried, a scene not fully remembered, but deeply felt. Gnomes looked over his shoulder. "It's not just audio," he said. "It's a mnemonic hook. A psychological anchor meant to trigger emotional recall." "You think it's aimed at me?" Hauser asked, startled. Gnomes tilted his head. "No," he replied. "I think it's aimed at whoever listens. The memory reshapes to fit the listener." Hauser turned to the wall again. This wasn't a room that had been sealed. It was a memory chamber, closed to prevent something from leaking out. Something contagious. Something alive in the act of remembering itself. Down in the hospital records archive, a cold, windowless chamber below ground, Gnomes and Hauser began the meticulous task of tracing patient transfers linked to room 206. But every document related to the room, from equipment logs to admission notes, had been digitally removed. Only fragments remained on microfiche and half-faded carbon copies, scattered in mislabeled drawers. One name surfaced again and again, Nurse Elira Shaw, assigned to room 206 for nearly a decade. Then gone. No resignation. No transfer. No death certificate. "She doesn't exist on the NHS register," Hauser said, frowning. "Nothing from the last 5 years." Gnomes found a personnel photograph, unlabeled, water-damaged, stuck to the back of an old radiology chart. A woman with silver blonde hair. Her eyes caught in motion, as though turning away from the camera. Expression unreadable. But as Hauser stared at the image, his pulse quickened. "I've seen her," he murmured. "Tonight. She walked past the east wing corridor as we arrived. She even nodded at me." Gnomes paused. "She's still here," he said quietly. "Still functioning as part of the hospital." Hauser's mind reeled. But if her records were erased? Gnomes closed the file gently. "She's not in the system. She's in the memory of the building." They both looked up. In the silence, that soft hum returned, almost musical now. And from behind the stack of cold archive shelves, a shadow shifted. Not fast. Not threatening. Just watching. Waiting to be remembered. Hauser and Gnomes moved deeper into the hospital's undercroft, a part of the building not found on any modern floor plan. The stairs were unlit, the handrail warm with the oily residue of years untouched. The smell down there was different, musty, almost organic, like damp paper and iodine. They entered a long corridor with peeling walls and ancient, rusted signage. Faded letters on one of the doors read, "Ward M, Cognitive Observation, Restricted Access." The lock was broken. Not smashed, picked. Gnomes gently pushed the door open. Inside were 6 hospital beds, each perfectly made. Each surrounded by what looked like outdated EEG equipment, strapped with redundant coils and analog dials. But none of the beds had patients. They had recordings. Dozens of magnetic tapes, labeled by date, all running on endless loops, each connected to a set of headphones and neurofeedback wires. A single sentence was repeated across every reel. "You are safe, and you remember the truth." The pitch varied, male, female, some distorted beyond recognition. "What is this place?" Hauser asked. Gnomes moved to one of the machines and checked the frequency output. "This isn't therapy," he said. "It's containment." "Of what?" "Not a person," Gnomes whispered. "A memory. Multiple, maybe. Memories so traumatic, so dangerous, they had to be quarantined like a virus." Hauser's eyes moved to the last tape, the one still recording. Its label was fresh. Elias March. Room 306. Status: active recall. The patient from the beginning. The one still humming. Still remembering. And someone, or something, was listening. They returned to the surface floor under the weight of new uncertainty. The sky outside had grown darker, storm pressing against the glass with low thunder, though no lightning followed. Gnomes held a fragile composition notebook, retrieved from a locked cabinet in Ward M, and began thumbing through the first few pages. It was written in tight, compulsive script, dated 6 years ago. The author, Nurse Elira Shaw. Day 1. The patient speaks in mirrors. He tells me about events I've not yet lived. Day 3. I had the dream again. The river. The watch in my hand. I remember drowning, but I've never learned to swim. Day 7. I can no longer distinguish between what he says and what I feel. His memories are overlapping mine. I've begun humming in my sleep. Hauser read over Gnome's shoulder, lips tightening with each entry. She wasn't treating him, Hauser said. She was absorbing him. Gnomes nodded slowly. This hospital's not haunted by ghosts, he said. It's haunted by conscious memory fragments. Neural echoes that behave like infection. And this nurse, she was patient 0. He closed the notebook gently. Or maybe not the first, Gnomes added. Just the first to write it down. Hauser paced slowly across the hall, eyes locked on the framed portraits of long-retired staff. In the bottom row, barely visible through the dust, he saw her again. Nurse Elira Shaw. Still young. Still smiling. And framed like she'd never left. Back in the patient belongings archive, Hauser rummaged through a battered gray box marked unclaimed. Its lid creaked open like a breath held too long. Inside, a man's wristwatch, old and water-damaged, the leather strap warped from exposure. Etched into the underside of the case were the initials EM. Elias March. But something was off. The style was dated, older than March's file indicated, and the work pattern didn't match someone recently admitted. The crystal was scratched in a spiral, as though it had been twisted against a mirror again and again. Gnomes took the watch delicately, turning it between his fingers. "It's magnetized," he murmured. "Slightly. Not enough to affect the time, but enough to imply prolonged proximity to an electromagnetic field." Hauser frowned. "Like the machines in Ward M?" Gnomes nodded. "And this?" he continued, holding it up to his stethoscope. "Still ticks, but not in real time. The seconds delay, skip, stutter. Could it be symbolic?" Hauser asked. "Like a trigger?" "No," said Gnomes. "I think it's literal. This watch records what he forgets, not what he remembers." They both looked at the tiny second hand as it jolted once more, skipping half a beat, then realigning, as though it had just rewritten a moment. Hauser stepped back. That same hum began again, faint, resonating through the archive walls. The watch didn't track time. It tracked amnesia. And somewhere in the hospital, time was being edited. Guided by the magnetic readings from the watch, Gnomes and Hauser descended a second stairwell, hidden behind the linen cupboard near the closed psychiatric ward. The steps coiled downward, far deeper than the hospital's known foundation. Each step was coated in dust, but their footprints didn't remain. At the bottom, a corridor lined with flickering wall lights. No signs, no security, just patient room numbers that made no sense. Room 1, Room 8, Room 3, Room 1 again. This place loops, Hauser said, voice low. Gnomes closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Not physically, he said. Neurologically. It's designed to confuse spatial memory. They tested the theory, leaving chalk marks and scratch lines as they moved. And every time they passed Room 1, the marks were gone. No sounds. No air movement. Just the constant, lulling hum that seemed to curl through the brain like a forgotten tune. In Room 3, they found a wheelchair. Upright. Facing the wall. The back was labeled property of Elira Shaw, though the upholstery was torn, and dust coated the handles. Hauser moved toward the seat. As he did, something in his chest tightened, a memory, being pushed in a chair just like this, a window to his right, a nurse humming behind him. He turned to Gnomes. That's not mine, he said. But I remember it. Gnomes placed a hand on the armrest. You've walked into a borrowed memory, he said. This place stores echoes, and it's beginning to play them back. They returned to the hallway, but the lights flickered more erratically now. Hauser felt a pressure at the base of his skull, like the static before a migraine, and every time the bulbs buzzed, a faint whisper followed. Not words. Not quite. More like someone trying to pronounce a name they hadn't learned yet. Dr. Gnomes pulled a small device from his inner coat, a modified neuroscanner normally used to detect REM patterns in sedated patients. He pointed it at Hauser. As the device activated, the screen filled with erratic curves, electrical signals usually seen only during intense dream states. You're awake, Gnomes said. But your brain's entering REM cycles anyway. Hauser's breathing slowed. You mean I'm dreaming while conscious? Not dreaming, Gnomes corrected. Sinking. They both turned toward the far end of the corridor, where a new sound began. Not humming, but laughter. Childlike, then old, then gone. This place isn't haunted, Gnomes murmured. It's playing back stored consciousness. Fragments of identity. Each looped like a vinyl record with no needle. As they approached Room 8 again, Hauser's vision blurred. For a moment, he saw his own hand, smaller, softer, holding a red balloon. He let go of Gnome's arm and whispered, "This isn't my memory, but I miss it." A hospital like this didn't treat the body. It recorded the soul. They emerged into a chamber unlike the others, circular, high-ceilinged, filled with flickering CRT monitors stacked 3 layers high. Every screen played fragments of faces. Some distorted, some serene, some staring back with unblinking eyes. In the center, a chair. Simple. Metal. Attached to it was a helmet lined with electrodes, many disconnected, some frayed. The floor around it was etched with patterns Hauser couldn't decipher. They looked like EEG traces overlaid with music notation. On the wall behind the chair, scrawled in black ink, "All healing begins with forgetting." Gnomes moved toward the chair. "This is the hub," he said. "The source of the feedback system. Patients came here, sat here, and gave up something. A memory. Maybe several. Hauser ran a hand along one of the monitor frames. On the screen, a younger version of himself appeared, then vanished. "I never recorded this," he whispered. "Did I?" "Not consciously," Gnomes replied. He retrieved another logbook, this one older, bound in cracked leather. The first page was dated 1982. Its title, Echo Ward Volunteer Records. Dozens of names. Some crossed out. Some underlined. One entry caught Gnome's eye. Hauser felt his thoughts begin to flicker, as though something else were rifling through them. The smell of old antiseptic. A child's laughter echoing down the hall. A nurse's perfume he couldn't name. He grabbed the edge of the monitor stand to steady himself. Gnomes acted quickly, pulling a vial of methylphenidate from his case, a stimulant usually reserved for treating narcoleptic hallucinations, and injected it into Hauser's shoulder. The fog lifted, but only slightly. "You are slipping into a nested recall," Gnomes said. "A false loop. Like an onion, memory within memory." Hauser nodded, still pale. "I saw myself," he said. "Younger. Being led through a corridor like this." But the nurse's face, it was blank. "Because it was reconstructed," Gnomes replied. "This hospital doesn't just record memories. It fills in the gaps with predictive cognition. Like a brain trying to finish a sentence it never started." They returned to the stairwell, but it now spiraled differently. Wider. The steps had changed material, stone, not linoleum. Hauser turned. "That wasn't there before." "Exactly," said Gnomes. "Because now you remember it being here. And that was the danger. In this place, memory didn't confirm reality. It created it." They moved upward, slowly, each step echoing longer than the last. Somewhere above, the humming returned. But now, it carried words. Soft, unfinished, and whispered in a voice that sounded like Hauser's own. E. Shaw, nurse observer. Memory scheduled for erasure following incident in room 306. She hadn't simply treated the patient. She'd sat in the chair. And she'd left a piece of herself behind. The voice above was faint, stretched thin like gauze soaked in ether, but it called with unbearable familiarity. Not simply in tone, but in memory. Hauser stopped on the 12th step. His breath caught, and for a moment, the air tasted of citrus peels and menthol, the scent of his childhood home. Yet he had never spoken of that home, not even to Gnomes. And he hadn't recalled it in years. Gnomes observed him carefully, but did not interrupt. "The hospital," Hauser said quietly. "It isn't just showing us memories. It's assembling them. Like a body rebuilt from tissue samples." Gnomes gave a nod. "A patient once described it as standing inside someone else's dream," he said. "But I think it's more dangerous than that. It's a broadcast loop, emitting triggers that suggest memories you've never had, until your brain accepts them as real." They reached a landing where the wall had peeled back, revealing a mural, a hand-drawn diagram of the human brain, overlaid with circuits, musical scales, and spiral shells. In the center was a phrase etched into the plaster. "You are not who you remember being." Hauser stared at it in silence. He didn't feel different. And yet something within him had shifted, like a photograph re-exposed to light. They moved forward again, neither speaking, until they reached a heavy door bearing the symbol of a tuning fork crossed with a scalpel. This was not a treatment room. It was a laboratory. The door creaked open, revealing a cold chamber lined with analog machines and spools of magnetic tape. At its center, a long table stacked with reel-to-reel recorders, data logs, and stacks of what looked like EEG readouts annotated in looping, elegant handwriting. Dr. Gnomes moved to one and held the paper up to the faint green glow of an emergency bulb. "This pattern," he murmured, "isn't a brainwave. It's a response to harmonic resonance. The human mind is being tuned." Hauser stepped around a sealed containment unit. Inside it was a chair, almost identical to the one from earlier, except this one had a helmet wired to what resembled a violin's body. Strands of copper ran through the strings, each linked to metal probes designed to rest on a person's skull. "A memory instrument," Hauser said softly. "It doesn't just record thought. It plays it back." Gnomes nodded. "But that's not the frightening part." He reached for a nearby clipboard, stained with ink and time. On it, a single patient name was circled again and again, Hauser D. Beneath it, a single note in red. "Subject resists loop assimilation. Echo drift unstable. Adjust harmonic index." Hauser's stomach dropped. "They've been experimenting," he said. "On me. And possibly still are," Gnomes replied more gently. "You may have been here before, Hauser." "More than once." Hauser looked at his hands. They didn't feel like his anymore. In the silence, a new hum began. Low. Metallic. Like a bow drawn across the spine of memory itself. Something inside the machine stirred. Something that remembered him. Gnomes turned the nearest dial, and the machine exhaled a soft crackle, followed by a sequence of chimes, rising like a lullaby played underwater. The lights above flickered in rhythm. As though the air itself were sinking to a pulse, no one had spoken aloud. Hauser moved toward the tape reels, watching one spool begin to rotate slowly. The room dimmed. And then, without instruction, the speakers began to whisper. It wasn't words. It was fragments. Laughter. A child's cough. Glass breaking. The rustle of hospital gowns. Echoes of events that didn't belong to any one person, yet sounded painfully familiar. Hauser's spine straightened. He remembered that sound, the cough. It had come from a patient he'd once interviewed after a routine ward incident. Or had he? The memory was vivid, but slippery. Gnomes was already scribbling in his notebook. "These aren't just recordings," he said. "They're stitched memories. Composed from multiple minds." Hauser looked at the cables running into the helmeted chair. "They're building new identities," he muttered. "Memory hybrids." "Correct," said Gnomes. "And judging by this frequency output, they're embedding those identities directly into neural substrates. No surgery. Just resonance." The recording continued to play. A lullaby surfaced, one that neither man could name, yet both could hum along to instinctively. The machine wasn't remembering. It was teaching. Hauser looked around, realizing the reel marked D. Hauser had not stopped spinning. And wouldn't, until he forgot who he was again. They left the lab behind, winding through another passage filled with cracked floor tiles and flickering auxiliary lights. The corridor seemed normal, until they looped it a second time. And then a third. Each time, the details shifted. A different painting on the wall. A different number of bulbs lit overhead. A trash can suddenly gone. At first subtle, then undeniable, reality was adjusting. Hauser marked the wall with his pen. But the mark vanished on the next pass. "This is a neural maze," Gnome said calmly. "It's designed to test memory retention by altering stimuli. The moment you expect a detail, it changes. The corridor is a diagnostic tool." "For what?" Hauser asked, tension in his voice. "For identity stability," Gnomes answered. Who you are must be reinforced, or it starts rewriting. They walked again. This time, the hallway opened into a viewing gallery, a long glass window looking down on an empty operating theater. Except, it wasn't empty. On the table lay a body, face covered. Gnomes leaned close to the glass. What do you see? He asked softly. Hauser blinked. He saw himself. Chest opened. Brain exposed. Wires humming. His own watch ticking faintly beside the open skull. No! Hauser hissed. That can't be me. I'm here. But the image didn't blink or shift. Gnomes whispered, This place may be showing you the version of you they built. The lights in the theater began to dim. The body on the table twitched, and the hum grew louder. The theater lights surged back on, pale, blue-white, illuminating a figure in the corner. At first, Hauser thought it was a reflection. Then it moved, independent of the glass. A tall man in outdated scrubs stood just behind the gurney, surgical mask drawn too tightly over his face. He did not acknowledge them. He simply adjusted a dial on a device mounted beside the patient's skull. The image was silent, but the memory was loud. Hauser's head throbbed. This isn't a live feed, Gnomes whispered. It's a memory extraction loop. We're watching a memory of someone watching your procedure. But whose memory? Hauser asked. As if in answer, the surgeon turned toward the gallery window. His eyes were gray, unblinking, and impossibly, they seemed to see Hauser. That's not a memory, Hauser said. That's a reflection. Gnomes took a slow step back. The humming sound fractured, becoming 2 tones, then 3. Layers of audio fighting for dominance. The surgeon moved again, pointing at the mirror. The glass spiderwebbed, then cracked. Then shattered, not from impact, but from rejection. As if the mirror refused to hold the image. Hauser stumbled backward. Gnomes steadied him. We're being extracted, he said. This isn't about rewriting memory anymore. It's about removing it, Hauser gasped. The theater below was gone. Only the hum remained. And a question that had begun to surface like something bloated and ancient from the bottom of a lake. If your memory is written by someone else, are you still you? Or only their design? The corridor returned, but it no longer led back to the gallery. Instead, each step felt muted, like walking across thick, wet gauze. Hauser's boots barely echoed. The lights dimmed with a breath-like rhythm, pulsing faintly in time with his own heartbeat. But that wasn't what unsettled him. It was the smell. Antiseptic, yes. But also something older, formalin, ink, damp paper, and dust, the scent of storage, of records left too long untouched. Gnomes led the way now, uncharacteristically silent. His eyes darted from side to side, reading signs that weren't visible to Hauser. Where are we? Hauser asked. The records wing, Gnomes murmured. But not the physical one. This is where neural identities are archived. Memories? No, Gnomes said. Files. Profiles. Constructed loops. They came to a heavy metal door. No handle. Only a retinal scanner. It beeped once softly, and the door slid open. Rows of translucent shelves glowed inside. Not filled with paper, but with thin cartridges, each marked with a name, a number, and a date. Hauser leaned forward. There, nestled between Harper D. and Headland R., was a cartridge labeled Hauser D. He pulled it gently from its slot. It was warm. Careful, Gnomes warned. That version of you may not match the one standing here. Hauser turned it over in his hands. It was labeled, revised, January 19th, 2022. But his real birthday was March. Who had rewritten him? And why? The name on the accompanying cartridge caught Gnome's eye. Dr. Gray, Eleanor, Trial Architect. He plucked it from the row and inserted it into a slot on the wall. The room dimmed again. A projection flickered to life, not on the wall, but in the air between them. A woman in her mid-40s stood beside a medical podium. Poised. Cold. Her voice carried the cadence of someone who had once spoken at conferences, but had long since stopped caring who listened. Trial 43B, she began. Subjects show enhanced retention of fabricated procedural memory after 16-hour exposure. Dissociative side effects remain minimal. However, identity drift presents a persistent obstacle. Subject 17 failed. Subject 22 rewrote host memory with borrowed trauma. Gnomes narrowed his eyes. She's referring to confabulation leakage, he muttered. Patients absorbing stories from others, then believing them as their own. Hauser's stomach turned. On screen, Dr. Gray continued. Recommendation: isolate test subjects with limited familial contact and fragmented personal history. Priority acquisition: patients already displaying memory inconsistencies. She turned then, as though aware of being watched. Her eyes locked directly onto Hauser's. Subject 29 will require closer surveillance. The projection ended. Hauser stepped back. I was subject 29, he whispered. Not just you, Gnomes said, voice steady. She's describing all of them. They followed a staircase down into what was labeled the records overflow unit, though it looked more like a sealed morgue. Rust-stained tiles, fluorescent lights blinking like tired eyes. Along the walls were faded employee photos, laminated IDs long since yellowed. Hauser paused in front of one photo. The name read, Isla Marin. That's her, he whispered. The nurse who died the night of the blackout. The night everything had begun. Except the ID had no start date, no department code, and her staff profile, printed below, was blank. Not redacted. Not corrupted. Blank. Impossible, Hauser said. Gnomes leaned in. She wasn't erased. He murmured. She was never written in. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Isla's presence was everywhere, recorded in patient logs, supply orders, even blood samples. But she had no employee record. She had been real enough to bleed, but not real enough to remember. Hauser's mind raced. What if she wasn't a nurse at all? What if she was a test subject, placed among the real staff to observe response? Gnomes nodded. Or worse, what if she was a memory, implanted into others to see how long she would be accepted as real? The hallway trembled slightly, as if offended by the question, and the lights dimmed again. Isla's ID badge curled in on itself and disintegrated. They emerged into a long, sterile chamber, colder than the rest. In its center stood a towering device, like a hybrid of MRI, music box, and cathedral organ. The neurocomposer. That's what the plaque read. A lattice of wires fed into a chair shaped like a throne, with arm cradles too tight to be for comfort. A visor hung above like a crown of lenses, each flickering with unreadable code. It doesn't just record memory, Gnomes said quietly. It composes it. Constructs entire sequences. Believable ones. With detail, trauma, resolution. Dreams, Hauser murmured. Histories, Gnomes corrected. Ones people can live by. A console beside it bore a familiar cartridge. Marin Isla, final render. Gnomes slid it in. The machine vibrated. A projection bloomed in the air, Isla, laughing, caring for a patient, flirting with a young doctor, arguing with a supervisor. It was a life. A real one. Except, it had all been created. Scene after scene. All perfectly lit, softly blurred, like a dream recalled too well. Hauser turned away, nauseated. This whole ward, he muttered. It's not treating memory disorders. It's testing them. Gnomes finished. They both turned to the cartridge slot. Hauser reached into his coat and produced the one labeled Hauser D. The machine welcomed it with a soft chime. Are you ready? Gnomes asked. No, Hauser whispered. But I have to know. The neural composer's visor descended, brushing Hauser's forehead with an unexpected warmth, like a nurse's hand checking for fever. Then silence. Then everything. Hauser's mind filled not with visions, but with impressions, memories that felt like dreams, but tasted like truth. A childhood birthday. A partner's touch. A college lecture. A case file. The way his mother's perfume clung to her scarf. Except the scarf was blue. And his mother never wore perfume. Not ever. Scene after scene played, familiar in shape, but wrong in temperature. His dog had been named Bishop. Or was it Baxter? He didn't own a dog. The composer whispered on, giving him more. Too much. Overlapping timelines. Flash memories. Disjointed seasons. Patients he never met, friends he never made, wounds he never felt, but flinched from anyway. He was crying, and smiling, and confused, and so very tired. The composer slowed. The final scene lingered. It was Isla, sitting across from him in the hospital cafe, laughing, her hand over his. Do you remember now? She asked gently. I think so, he said. Then she faded. And with her, the memory. The visor lifted. Gnomes was waiting. Well? He asked. Hauser shook his head slowly. I don't know who I am anymore. Gnomes put a hand on his shoulder. Then let's find out. The door they emerged through no longer led to the corridor they remembered. Instead, it opened into a perfectly square, windowless room, beige, soft-lit, and eerily silent. In the center stood a single hospital bed, perfectly made. Atop the blanket, a folded uniform, a staff badge, and a clipboard. The badge read, David Hauser, orderly. Hauser stepped closer. The air changed, thickened. His vision blurred slightly, as though his mind was resisting what it saw. Gnomes bent down to examine the clipboard. Daily routine, medication distribution, patient rounds, file entry. Every day the same. No variation. No incident reports. Hauser picked up the uniform. It smelled of starch and antiseptic, too fresh, as if never worn. But it was his size. The wall opposite flickered. A projection emerged, a surveillance feed on loop. It showed Hauser, entering the same room, again and again, always wearing the same uniform. Each time, he followed the routine exactly, straightening the bed, checking a pulse that wasn't there, nodding as if listening to an answer. Is this real? Hauser whispered. No, Gnome said. It's a controlled imprint. They recorded your behavior, then simulated it on repeat, until the loop became your memory. But I don't remember this room. You're not supposed to. Hauser stepped back from the bed. and the projection froze. He stared at his looping self. The loop stared back. Then it smiled. And blinked. The next room resembled an HR office, complete with file drawers, a clock ticking overhead, and a fake ficus in the corner. On the desk sat a series of interview forms, each dated differently, yet all in Hauser's handwriting. Name, David Hauser. Position applied for, patient support technician. Reason for interest. To help others heal. Each form was identical. Each one signed accepted. Falsified onboarding, Gnomes said, skimming them. They embedded these into your subconscious, likely using post-hypnotic reinforcement during your real admission. But I never applied here, Hauser said. He opened a drawer. Inside were headshots. Dozens. Hundreds. All with different names. All with his face. Some had glasses. Others didn't. Some bore scars. Others smiled wide, carefree. But every one of them, unmistakably him. They were testing variations, Gnomes whispered. Trying different memory shells to see which stuck. But why? Gnomes held up one of the photos. It bore the label, Hauser V12, 72% retention success. They weren't just rewriting you, Gnomes said. They were selecting you. The version that was most compliant, most useful, most likely to accept the illusion. And the other versions? Gnomes didn't answer. He didn't need to. A corridor of mirrors, but not reflective ones. These were one-way viewing panes into identical rooms. Inside each, a patient sitting alone, performing a repeated task. One shuffled cards endlessly. One buttoned and unbuttoned a shirt. One recited phone numbers with surgical precision. Another sat in stillness, mouthing silent prayers. Each of them, Gnomes said, is a discarded identity. Versions of test subjects that didn't stabilize, or who resisted the memory scripts too hard. Hauser's breath caught in his throat. The fourth room held someone who looked exactly like him, but older, hunched, gray in the beard. He sat drawing, over and over, a face. The same face. A woman's. Isla. The drawing slipped from his fingers. Hauser turned away, but not fast enough. The man in the room looked up and smiled, as if recognizing him, as if saying, "We were the same once." "Let's keep moving," Hauser whispered. But he couldn't unsee it, and he couldn't escape the sinking feeling that he hadn't escaped at all. They reached a chamber far colder than the others, clinically pristine. At its center, a pedestal. Upon it, one final cartridge, encased in frosted glass. Labeled Hauser D, unaltered sequence. Gnomes lifted the case carefully. "This is you," he said softly. "Before everything. Before the reprogramming. Before the trial. Before the composer ever touched your mind." Hauser nodded, trembling. "Play it," he said. The projection lit the room with warm sepia tones, a street, a real one. Rain. A car crash. Screams. Hauser ran toward the sound. A woman lay across the pavement, bleeding, gasping. He kneeled beside her, pressing on the wound, calling for help. She whispered a name. Not his. "Find Isla." The paramedics pulled him away. The woman died. That was the moment. His turning point. The real one. She wasn't just fabricated, Gnomes said. She existed. Briefly. Enough to root herself in your mind. Enough to become the seed of everything they planted afterward. Hauser sank to his knees. She died trying to warn me, he said. She died giving you a name, Gnomes corrected. A clue, Hauser whispered. A beginning, Gnomes finished. Outside the chamber, the corridors had changed. No longer clean. No longer symmetrical. The hospital was collapsing. But not in fire or ruin. In logic. Walls bent into curves. Ceilings flickered into open sky. Lights pulsed like heartbeats, not electric ones, but organic, rhythmic. Like breathing. The composer's work was unraveling. You've seen too much, Gnomes said. You've diverged from the program's accepted parameters. Meaning? The composer can't hold you anymore. You're falling out of its narrative. Ahead, a figure emerged, barefoot, dressed in hospital linen. Isla. She didn't smile this time. She raised her hand, not to wave, but to point. Behind her, a staircase that spiraled upward. Not a physical exit. A conceptual one. The memory they'd been trying to rewrite. Was choice. You have to decide now, Gnomes said. Do you want to wake up as the version they made, or as the one you truly are, fractured, grieving, but free? Hauser looked at Isla, then at the staircase, and stepped forward, toward the truth, toward the final chapter. The staircase did not obey gravity. Each step shifted with thought, elongating, compressing, pulsing like the folds of a living brain. Hauser climbed slowly, with Gnomes behind him, each footfall echoing as if time itself were adjusting its tempo to accommodate them. Above, the ceiling unfolded, not with light, but with memory. Moments drifted in suspended animation, Isla smiling under rainfall, Gnomes pouring tea in a cluttered lab, a younger Hauser laughing beside a hospital gurney, unaware that his life was about to be overwritten. This place, Gnome said softly, isn't the end. It's the crossroad, where they wrote your story, and where you decide whether to keep reading. Hauser nodded, jaw clenched. As they reached the top, a chamber opened, empty, circular, lined with walls that shimmered like silver glass. At its center, a chair. Wires extended from the ceiling like tendrils. A single console blinked slowly with the word. Reclaim? Gnome stepped forward, examining the neural interface. This is the composer's core, he whispered. The place they inject new selves into people. They've done this to dozens, maybe hundreds. But this interface, it's tuned to you. Hauser stared at the blinking prompt and understood. It wasn't asking if he wanted to delete the past. It was asking if he wanted to restore the fractured self. The one who never healed from Isla's death. The one who still asked questions. The one who refused to let go. I'm not just going to remember, Hauser said, stepping into the chair. I'm going to rewrite them. Gnome smiled faintly. That's my boy. The moment Hauser sat, the composer awakened, not with noise, but with awareness. Streams of data rose like dust motes. Memories untangled. Scripts broke. The chair responded to his thoughts, sinking faster than any interface should. Hauser didn't just relive his life, he saw it. As a tapestry. As code. As an engineered illusion pretending to be grief. He moved through it like a surgeon, excising lies, stitching wounds, restoring what had been stolen. In one corner of the console, a flickering identity log. Dozens of names, test subjects, rewritten lives. He hesitated only a moment, then deleted the command queue entirely. No more loops, he said. Suddenly, sirens. Gnomes looked up. They're trying to reassert control, But the composer's framework had already begun folding in on itself, the artificial memories burning off like fog under sunlight. The mirrored walls shattered, and beyond them daylight. Not artificial light. Real light. The rooftop of the actual St. Ferris Hospital, gray stone, cool wind, the scent of antiseptic and autumn rain. They'd broken through. Hauser stumbled forward, dizzy. His skin tingled like waking limbs. And then he looked up. Across the rooftop stood Isla. Not the echo. Not the implant. Her. Or the closest remnant of her that still existed. She smiled, soft and sad. And faded. But her voice remained, inside him now. Clear. Calm. Real. St. Ferris Hospital had no record of a composer project. No Room 306. No Elias March. But Hauser still walked those halls sometimes, late at night, tracing the outlines of things that were almost erased. Dr. Gnomes returned to his cluttered office, humming strange lullabies and tapping notes into journals no one else understood. They never spoke of what happened again. Not out of denial, but reverence. Some truths weren't meant for reports. Some scars didn't need bandaging. And some memories, no matter how much the world tried to erase them, refused to disappear. They lived on, in quiet footsteps, in lingering echoes, in names whispered to the wind, like Isla, like March, like Hauser, the one who remembered.